Hello and welcome to another episode of Nothing Ventured with me, Aarish. Today in the studio with me, I have Samira Sohail. Samira built digital products at the BBC, worked on iPlayer, BBC News, BBC Sport, and BBC Earth. She moved from JP Morgan Cazenove into product, then led product at Newsela, a K-12 curriculum platform used in 90% of US schools, and contributed to its position as one of 20 global edtech unicorns. She founded Luxor Beta in 2016, a product and venture studio serving high net worth individuals, family offices, and private equity teams. She invested in 60 plus seed startups with 4 exit at Bill Silver Management and created the podcast Samira Stalks. In today's podcast, we talk about how curiosity-led learning and working are the future.
We have lost the art of what I think is like a Renaissance career.
How experience trumps all and action is critical.
If you think you want to be an artist, like draw, paint, sell something, get something out there.
Why you should put on some clothes and go to an event.
Put some clothes on, go to an event, get themselves together.
And how working with a family office is a function of building trust.
There's risk with that as well when you go and work with a family office then, because all of your trust is kind of like dissipated or correlated into that entity without necessarily being able to talk about that in a public way.
How stalking is part of Samira's DNA.
I'm a stalker. Like I will still go out, hunt deals, hunt talent, hunt interesting ideas. And that's, part of the DNA.
How relationships, taste and judgment are now at a premium.
It's relationships, it's taste and it's judgment now that are going to be at a premium.
And how tech has no borders, and so neither should you.
One of the reasons I got interested in technology is because technology has no borders.
Let's get straight into it. Hi guys, whilst I've got you for a second, I thought I'd reintroduce myself. My name's Aarish. I am the host of Nothing Ventured, the podcast where I talk to the people behind the stories that make the venture ecosystem go around. I'm also the founder of Emerge One, a consultancy that provides fractional CFO support to venture-backed tech startups from seed to Series B and beyond. If you enjoy the podcast, we would really appreciate it if you could subscribe wherever it is that you listen. And if you ever want to talk to me about either a guest that we've had on or something that has been itching your mind for a few days, do get in touch on LinkedIn or X. I'm always up for a bit of a natter. Right, let's get back into it. Samira, thank you so much for joining me here today. Real pleasure in this ridiculous heat wave we're having. You're looking very summery, might I add, but really wonderful to have you here with me today.
Thank you. It's great to be here and even greater to be around air conditioning.
It is quite nice when you finally feel the cool, refreshing breeze of something that should be very easy to install, but for some reason is not. We're going to dive straight in because you've surfaced nonlinear careers in the past and argue that learning quickly, relationships and EQ have become almost a premium. For people who reject the ladder, and by that I mean the kind of career ladder, when must they choose depth and credentialed progression over network-driven optionality? And what career fragility do they accept when they double down on speed and relationships, do you think?
A lot in there.
There's a lot in there, yeah.
But to unpack, I think, as you said, I've been a big proponent of what I call a map, which is this idea of curiosity-led learning and working. And to your point, culminating the skills, experience, network, to be able to provide value, to be able to do that. And there are trade-offs in that, to your point. There's the trade-off of potential depth. There's the trade-off of stability. There's the trade-off of just the identity of saying, I am GTM at Series B startups for my life, and that. But one thing I would say is, we have lost the art of what I think is like a Renaissance career. And no one would say that people didn't, that Da Vinci didn't do those subjects with depth. And there was pattern recognition across those multiple fields. So one of my favorite books to always refer to is Gödel, Escher and Bach, which is the kind of collision between maths, music and art. And I try and think similarly about, I wouldn't even call it my career. It's just about what I'm doing, what I'm creating, what I'm learning.
I think there's a few things there, right? So I think this point about the Renaissance career, we're seeing like an upsurge, certainly in the UK, of, those sort of small dinners and I keep forgetting the name for these. What were they called?
Salons?
Salon style. Yeah. So salon style kind of interaction. I also, like, whilst you were speaking, I was just like, yep, that's 100% how I've kind of approached life. And very quickly, having gotten on the ladder, realized that the ladder was not for me. And I think there is a place for both, but I think we're moving into a world where it's becoming less and less the case. And I think in a world of AI, especially, that whole kind of, what you described as curiosity-led, not just learning, but working is super important, because I think we're moving into a world where you are going to have a lot more breadth and a lot less depth and specialization in certain cases. And certainly, both you and I come from kind of a startup world background. And if you think about how startups work, they absolutely thrive, at least on the initial stages, on lots of generalists, attacking problems as and where they come. But I guess, an additional question to that is, how do young people even know this? Right, this is something I grapple with both my daughters. Is, on the one hand, they've been fed the line, not necessarily by me, but school, university, job, career path. And then you've got me on the sidelines saying, none of it matters, just go and be good at whatever you're doing, and you're going to change stuff loads of times in your life. And over the next 3 to 5 years, things are going to change dramatically, I think. Do you think that people should just automatically now adopt that sort of framework in their mind? Or do you think there is still space for that kind of career ladder style progression of, let's say, the 80s, 90s, early 2000s?
Yeah, I think it's a mixed media approach. And I will preface with saying I've been in both. I've been in institutions like the BBC and seen the beauty that comes with depth. And I was at an edtech unicorn. And again, like, I could only make decisions and judgment with that depth of experience, where I traded off maybe network and other opportunities and my own brand and those things. But when I speak to young people or anyone going into the workforce, it's actually around self-inquiry.
Yeah.
Like, some people do their best work in structured environments. They
need the deadline. They thrive on the collaborative aspect of it. They enjoy the guardrails. Because it just means they know exactly what they should be doing.
And full focus. I always compare myself to my brother, but he stayed in private equity and it was like fully focused on that. And then, built up there. Whereas some people prefer, like I said, a map, a curiosity-led approach. And I think it requires all of us to be really honest about what's important.
And who we are.
Yeah, like, are you values-driven? Are you mission-driven? Are you money-driven? Do you want financial security and stability? Do you want a qualification that you can always fall back on? I think asking those questions to yourself at the beginning, and I think in a lot of ways, if you don't know, try stuff. Like, I always think about my summers at university are quite a good reflection of like what I've done later. So I think my first summer I backpacked around Egypt with like 2 of my girlfriends. I think,
as you do.
Yeah. The second summer was at Goldman's. I can't remember even what I did. And the third summer was, maybe The Guardian or something completely different, So I think experience trumps all.
Yeah.
So the main thing is action. Like, it doesn't matter. If you think you want to be an artist, like, draw, paint, sell something, get something out there. If you want to be a coder, if you want to be in the startup world, build something. And as Naval said, well, there's no excuse now because AI, you can prototype. But if you can't code, build media, whatever it is, build an Instagram account. Like, so,
like I refer back to Naval Ravikant, for those that don't know, but I refer back to him quite a lot in the way I think, right? And 2 things that we're going to talk about this as well, but 2 things that he talks about is leverage something, right? And the things that you can leverage are your time, which is a job, right? A career, or even a solo consultant. You can leverage other people, so build a services-based business of some nature. You can leverage technology. You can leverage, which is obviously building code. You can leverage media, so whether that's write a book, build a podcast, to your point, Instagram page, whatever it is, and then ultimately you can also leverage money, right? So use money to create more money. And I think it really distills, I guess, now the way that I think about kind of the things that I do. What am I trying to leverage, and why am I trying to leverage it? Not that everything, by the way, I think needs to be leveraged, right? But certainly, if you are an entrepreneur, you have to think a little bit along those lines. And then the other thing, and I really want to touch on this as well. The one phrase of his that I absolutely love. He says, "Play long-term games with long-term people." Right.
Yes.
So going to your point about relationships, how do you think about that?
Yeah, it's again one of my favorite quotes. I think relationships are really the foundation of a lot of work, a lot of cultures and tribes that are built at startups. I read a lot or watch a lot of Brené Brown, and she talks about this concept of microtrust.
Okay.
That you build trust in small interactions, in impeccability of word, in being honest about on a daily basis about where things are. And I think relationships come from shared values, shared mission, complementary ways of working, complementary styles, ability to challenge, ability to listen, all of those kind of good
the
things.
Soft skills.
Yeah.
I think, and it's interesting, right? Because again, sadly, far too much of my consumption of Instagram leads to provocative thinking. But I think I was watching an Instagram reel of I want to say the editor of The Economist, Zadie or Zani, I can't remember her name now. But she was talking about the kind of jobs, the graduate jobs crisis that we have, certainly in the UK at the moment, right? Where, I see it with with one of my daughters for sure. Like, it is really tough to find work there, and there are people out there, with 2 degrees working as baristas in coffee shops, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? But it is not the promise that they were sold. And what she says is, we've now got a world where you've got thousands of applicants writing applications using AI, and then you've got on the other side thousands of companies using AI to screen the applicants, right? And it's just this sort of morass of bots talking to bots. And actually, by the time the humans come into the loop, you may have missed some really interesting stuff. And I've had this sort of a conversation with, for example, Adam Schwabe from episode 1, where they use a lot of AI in their deal flow analysis, right? But I was like, okay, but in venture, you're looking for outliers. So if everything relies on the bot, aren't you at risk of missing that outlier? But what, again, apologies, Zani or Zadie, have me on The Economist, and then maybe I'll actually get your name right. Maybe, no? See, the thing that she actually then said was, so interestingly and somewhat, unexpectedly, therefore, in a world of AI, human relationships are actually at a premium and more important than anything. Because to your point, if you can look someone in the eye, build trust, or even leverage a network that you have built, not necessarily to get your dream job, but to get a job or to explore an area of interest, you are going to be miles ahead of the others that are literally just relying on the computer to kind of hack their way through to success.
Yeah, I would say, one of the reasons I got interested in technology is because technology has no borders. And so to me, it enabled me to live, work, play all across the world. Yeah. So I've lived on 3 continents or whatever it is. So just by a forcing function, and you'll have this experience too, of having been new in new countries where English isn't the first language, or I don't have the scaffold. You don't have a network. Yeah. You have to build credibility through communities, through relationships. And I think this actually lends itself to a really lovely story about why I'm here at this podcast today, which is, I've just 6 months ago moved back to London after a decade of being in the States. And one of the first things I did was start building community. And one of those communities was our school network. And that is how Aarish and I met, through an investor and entrepreneur community that Sam Goldsober.
Shout out.
Yeah.
Shout out, Sam.
Shout out, Sam.
And it was definitely a great location.
He had kind of built this organic WhatsApp community. I said, I'd love to get the girls' school involved. We should do this together. And then lo and behold, 2-3 events later, we've got a summer one coming up, everyone. It's building and flourishing. But that comes from what I call like trust, as soon as everyone walks into the room, because there's a shared experience, there's a shared alignment of values, of work ethic. No matter like when you went to that school, it's like an alumni group for university.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about that is it is a high trust environment because both of us are privileged enough to have been to a private school. Those private schools, tend to awful word, but breed that kind of not, and I wouldn't say it's a closed network by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, there were lots of people that weren't ex-Habs alums there. I think there is that implicit trust that if you went to the school, you kind of know the sort of person that you're going to be speaking to. It's probably someone from a relatively similar background, relatively similar experience growing up, North London, etc. Right? So that makes it an easier first step because you've already got the buy-in of trust. I think just by mere fact of there is a common. There is that common history. But I remember walking into that room. I walked in. With me was one other guy who I did know very well from Habs. He was 4 years older than me, but I knew no one else. I really didn't know anyone else, right? In that particular at that particular event. Since the event, I've spoken to about half a dozen people that were there, including yourself, of course, right? I'm recording a pod with someone who was at the event tomorrow. She's building, businesses raised something like $18 million.
The token compression one.
Yeah, absolutely.
I like that one.
It's really cool. And she is like Miriam is, she's a very interesting character, right? But on top of that, I met someone who's in a similar industry. I've met someone who potentially may lead to being a client. And again, the reason that those conversations were able to happen was because of that high trust and immediate recognition of, I know where this person is coming from. And therefore you kind of do away with a lot of that sort of initial, okay, is someone trying to get something out of this? Is there an ulterior motive or whatever? The great thing is, with the advent of things like WhatsApp and other platforms, the ability to carry those conversations both online and offline in a group or in an individual setting are really amazing. But the thing that I think is super, super critical is there was a period sort of 2020, 2021 into 22 in a sort of post-COVID-ish era or in a not quite post-COVID-ish era where I was really struggling with in-person events. Like I just didn't feel like going. And then I started going again and I was like, oh gosh, this is what I've been missing. Because there is just something so wonderful about meeting people in person, looking them in the eyes and having a conversation. I think one of the real shames of the current era, especially for younger people now, is they're not going into the office necessarily. They're not having those in-person experiences. They don't tend to go out, as groups in the same way that maybe you and I did.
Well, I will say there has been quite a shift back to analog. We're seeing something like the making of cyber decks, for example.
Nice.
And, Papier, the stationery startups, just started doing puzzles and, at-home activities. So I would say some of Gen Z are bucking that trend as well.
Like, re-embracing it.
Yeah, like bird watching or putting together in real life communities because they're recognizing that it is, again, it's a hybrid world because you also have to understand we have lived in a world without mobile phones and kind of without technology, but that's also all they've ever known.
That's all they know, yeah.
But that is one thing I do always say to young people when they're looking for work or looking for jobs. I say, get out there and meet people. Yeah.
I mean, my entire life has been about building relationships. That's how my business works. It's how I built this podcast. It's how I operated back in New Guinea. And it is the one thing I tell my kids all the time, like, get out there, just meet people, socialize, network, understand. Like, it may be not your favorite thing to do, but socializing doesn't mean going to a room full of 100 people and trying to speak to all 100 of them. Like, meet 3 people, meet 5 people. Like, you and I didn't actually meet at that event, for example, right? Like, I think I maybe helloed on the way in, but we didn't get a chance to speak. And then we spoke afterwards, right? Like, so going to the event doesn't mean you have to speak to everyone or feel obliged that you need to be making conversation 100% of the time about everything with everyone. It's just about showing up. It's about saying I'm here.
I always give someone like 10x more points if they were if they bothered to get out, put some clothes on, go to an event, get themselves together. Versus a LinkedIn cold message or whatever it is, whatever that investment in the relationship was I'll get messages saying, hey, Samira, I listened to this podcast, or hey, I read this LinkedIn post, you know, some form of investment and friction, basically.
Yeah. It's
in a good way.
It's like the hooked kind of paradigm, right? Like you want people to have actually made an effort. And it's interesting because when we host, for example, we've hosted a couple of dinners, and I speak to a few people that kind of host roundtables or dinners and so on. And what a lot of them have found is actually just putting a paywall, whether it's a $5 or $10 or something like that, actually increases the likelihood that people turn up because they have made that investment, right? Whereas even if we're holding a really high value kind of experience or activity or dinner, you get people dropping out because it's not, you know.
So, Aarish, are you saying we should put a paywall behind our investor and entrepreneur group?
No, absolutely not. No, I've paid my tax by having gone to the school in the first place, so therefore I feel like I would be very, very upset if you did that. But I think there is a difference because that was not a business event, right? I think that was a social more than anything else. But I do think, you know, it does make a difference. I also think that, you know, I can't remember if you and I talked about this, but in my year group, I left school in 97. I would say, you know, the majority of my year group went on to the lawyer, doctor, accountant kind of typical sort of thing. And others I've spoken to, you know, who graduated later have said the same. Others who graduated just before the financial crisis said, well, their year group ended up becoming a bit more entrepreneurial because they had to, because there were no jobs. But even today, like my niece and nephew, my nephew's now at university, but his sister is still at the school. And it doesn't feel like it's changed that much, right? It's still promoting the kind of career ladder linear.
I don't, you know,
disagree.
Killian, is that his name?
Killian?
Sorry, Killian.
That's okay.
You met him last week.
He does listen to the podcast.
Killian put together, you know, that Dragon's Den at school, and I'd say that is changing now as well. I also think it's a function of like the times.
Yeah.
You know, professional services was seen as a very like credible and you know,
for sure,
thing, and it still is to do. I remember when I was at university, you know, Google and Facebook were just about putting notes in our pigeonholes, and it was almost comical. We were like, this is comical. Why would we go there versus Goldman Sachs? Whereas now you're going to an index-backed startup or something backed by Local Globe, you'd be a fool to turn that down.
I had a friend in the year, a year above me, he did his MBA at INSEAD, got a job at Lehman's, like literally was starting, I think, the day before they went under. They went under, so he was looking for work. Ended up at Google in their corp dev, I think, or finance. I'm not sure exactly where. But it just wasn't for him. So this would have been, 2008, right? 2008, 9, I guess. And went looking for banking wherever he could find banking. Because yes, to your point, it wasn't a thing. But I think what's super interesting is actually the kids coming out of school and into university and out of university now, rather, they have far more options, right? Like I think in one way, they have far more options than we did. Because like when I came out, like startup, what the hell is a startup, right? And I graduated at the end of the dot-com bubble, right? So it really was professional services or banking. Or
well,
whatever,
I think
right? Like
even outside of like what the job market offers, if you think about universal access to education, like you can watch all of Stanford courses on MOOCs. You've got universal access to education for the like basically free at the point of use. If you have the internet at home or access to a library. And now you've got tooling in which you can actually create at scale at ease. So whether that's, you know, content, whether that's like now prototyping HTML, experiment. So in a lot of ways, I think it's a really empowering
100%.
time, like to be alive with technology. You know, things that would take my team 6 weeks, like in a sprint, can be done in like one Claude deep focus session. I mean, it's actually wild what like how empowered I think we are at times like this as well. And then again, the third thing is, in a way, the opportunity to reach absolutely anyone. Sure, they might not reply on LinkedIn or cold email, but that's there now. Whereas before, that was locked up in real life or having to be in the right rooms and the right events. Yeah,
so it's a balance between, but I think, you know, you mentioned it earlier, like experience trumps everything, but action, the first step is the step that you need to take. And I think that's the important thing, because yes, access to all of this, but I always come across people, I don't know where to start. I don't know what to do. And I've got this idea and I want to build this, I want to build that. I'm like, well, don't start with day zero, I want to get to day 2000, start with day 0, get to day 1, right? Like just build the smallest thing that you possibly can and then iterate from there, right? And I think a lot of people kind of assume that they got to do everything all at once, whether it's building a network or whatever, right? Like, you know, I remember when I came back to the UK in 2015, I didn't know anyone here, right? Like my entire kind of network was non-existent. And then I started building that up probably from like 2016 onwards, you know, and fast forward to today, 22,000 followers on LinkedIn or whatever, for whatever that's worth. But that came from just taking that first step, sending that first cold LinkedIn request, or, you know, turning up and having a chat with someone at an event or whatever it was, right? But it's just taking that first step. And I think people, you know, again, we all get kind of frustrated with, well, this guy seems to be doing so much better, or she's just raised this much money, or, you know, they've been doing that. But no one really understands all the effort and the work that went into getting to that stage. So yeah, I mean, I guess like if I were to wrap everything you've set up, right, it would be just get started, right? Like, I mean, everything is available to you now.
Yeah.
Get started. You don't have to be pigeonholed into a niche. If you don't want to be, explore the world, you know, satisfy your curiosity and do things that you enjoy doing.
Also, I think things are becoming, like software is becoming more ephemeral, you know, like this idea of failure or like things not working, like try stuff, post it, launch stuff. Get users, don't get users, like keep it moving. Yeah. It doesn't matter, basically. Like, you know, let go of ego, reputation. It's essentially, how do you keep a beginner's mindset? And
this podcast is like the supreme example of that. Like, I didn't start the podcast because I was intending it to grow or do anything. It was just because I love talking to people. And here we are, like 5-6 years on, and it's still going. I still love doing it. And I think probably the point at which I will stop enjoying doing it is the point at which it becomes in some way a commercial enterprise. But it's that beginner's mindset, like treat every conversation as if it's your first. Treat every sort of, you know, opportunity to learn as if it's your first, right? And always be the kind of, you know, don't be the person in the room with all the answers. Try and be the person in the room who has all the questions, because that's actually far more powerful, right? I want to move on because we've got a lot to talk about. So I want to talk about your kind of life inside the life of a family office and, you know, and working with an entertainment mogul. So you helped build a venture fund, worked with an entertainment manager, and built Luxor Beta for high net worths, family offices, and private equity. So where does a family office's willingness to back experiments collide with like a venture capitalist need for repeatable returns? And which costs should founders who need product talent accept when they pick one capital model over the other?
Okay, so I'll answer the question, but then I will have to tell you the story of how I actually came to do this, because it maps back to our relationships point.
Yeah.
But look, to answer the question, the main difference between a venture fund, or two differences between a venture fund and a family office, are firstly the time horizon, and secondly what I call like the personal liability.
Mm-hmm.
So ultimately, a venture fund is funded by LPs. There's a discipline that comes with that capital allocation in terms of, you know, check size, velocity, and the tenure of the fund.
Yeah.
That doesn't exist for a family office. So
it's their money. They kind of can do what they want over whatever time horizon. Yeah.
Basically, yes. And that means there might be periods where we're deploying a lot, and there might be periods where you're wrapping up those purse strings and, you know, main focus is on what I call the main revenue generating businesses. So the first thing is like that time horizon. And then the second thing is why family offices lend itself to this idea of patient capital, which is, you know, with a fund, ultimately it is a money on money business. We're doing 50, especially at seed stage, we're doing 50 startups. Like one will be the fund returner, 3 to 5 will return something, and not in a bad way, to hell with everything else. Yeah. Like that is the premise of the fund.
Yeah.
Whereas with a family office, that isn't necessarily the case. Like often we invested based on a founder relationship, based on a bet in a market that, you know, maybe, you know, the rest of the market wouldn't fund.
Or even a product or service which you could see being absorbed into the family's operations.
Yeah,
right?
and I wouldn't say they're mutually exclusive.
Yeah, sure.
I think increasingly we're seeing like more mixed cap tables. Interestingly, family offices invest around 10% into startups, but make up 30% of the capital allocated.
Interesting.
So
10% of their balance sheet, but 30% of the total capital. Is that right?
10% of the balance sheet of like all money invested into startups.
Okay, got it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's space for both. I think they are, having been on like both sides of that table, they're very different beasts. And, the family office or the entertainment mogul I worked for as well was quite private. So a venture fund is borderline becoming a media entity now, and we're seeing that more and more. A16Z
For the last
buying
3
up
years,
media properties. Our boy Harry Stebbings is obviously, really...
Well, he's taken it to the absolute pinnacle of what you can do with a media organization.
Yes, and Steve Bartlett as well. So, increasingly we're seeing venture funds move more into media. They're basically they want to be a talent magnet, an ideas magnet.
Whereas family offices are very naturally inherently private.
Yeah, I mean, it depends family to family, but like the one I worked with was quite inherently private. So that's another difference, and that there's risk with that as well when you go and work with a family office then, because all of your trust is kind of like dissipated or correlated into that entity without necessarily being able to talk about that in a public way.
So it's interesting. We have a lot of clients that we work with try and raise from family offices. I know a lot of family offices that have tried to deploy directly or become LPs in funds. And one of the things, there are two things. So one, to my earlier point, for the most part, most family offices are not they're not easy to find. Like they are, for the most part, relationship kind of driven, right? Like introductions, etc. Which means that the sort of deal flow they get can be quite narrow, right? Which is why often they get, not necessarily get spooked, but they make a decision that, okay, going direct is way tougher than we thought, therefore easier to go in as an LP into a fund, therefore we get more access across a broader number of deals and potentially even ability to kind of co-invest or follow on or whatever. But I guess, if you, because to your point, venture, I would say is inherently a relationship driven game. And that's why that's why so many VCs become kind of media commentators of one form or the other, whether that's building a podcast, having a newsletter, whatever, right? Like, why? Because it sets out their stall, it attracts, companies that maybe want to raise a check from them, but equally, it gives them liquidity within the market beyond the capital, right? Because I think what a lot of people always forget is venture is still a business, right? And
yes.
And therefore, if the business of venture is investing and then hopefully realizing some of those investments, your ability to capture as wide a breadth of the market as possible is super important. How do family offices do that, given everything else I just said as well?
That's actually a great question. I'll just mention how I met.
Sure.
His name is Bill Silver. He has a company called Bill Silver Management. I had moved to Hawaii during COVID after being at this edtech unicorn in New York, and he was the first person I met while I was out there. And for 6 months, we were actually friends, paddleboarding together, surfing, sound baths and all other island activities you can imagine. And we just built trust as friends, honestly. And it's very Indian style in Hawaii, like open doors for dinners and,
nice.
And family style eating. And also it was a period where, it was COVID. So people weren't with their kind of normal families and things like that. Yeah, you really, there was synapsis in terms of the community you made. And then it was a function of the cities, no one wanting to go back to the city because they'd open up a city and then close it. And he puts on all the talent at the Hollywood Bowl. So any show that's at the Hollywood Bowl, he organizes essentially. And so obviously there were no shows playing at the Hollywood Bowl. And he's also the manager of Linkin Park. And Linkin Park weren't touring or not. Wow. They weren't necessarily making music at the time. And so again, what came about at the tennis and golf club was, Samira, hey, I have some investments here and there, you know, can you have a look at them? And I had experience in venture capital, and I did. And then I realized, like, actually, you know, a couple of these were like serious. They were first checks into what are now unicorns. And I was like, hey, either you have a network for this or you have a knack. And actually it's both, which is good deals are coming to you and you have the risk appetite to actually cut a check. So if you want to, we can formalize this and we can do this. And so in the end, I ended up kind of co-chartering a venture fund with him from Hawaii. That's how it began, really.
And then how would you source deals, right? Because
so I think then it was a mix of our network. So I was in Kauai, which is, you know, a very certain type of Hawaiian island. Like Zuckerberg has a place there, Rick Rubin, Johnny Ives. You know, there were XYC kind of founders kicking around. There were music moguls. There were, you know, TV and entertainment people. There were financiers. So in a way, you were at like
kind of Riviera style.
Monaco, as in, you know, just by the people on the island, like deals were coming through. And these are smart, intelligent, creative, adventurous people who want to do things. So I think mainly sourced through network and through like cold picking up the phone. Like, what have you seen recently? What's interesting? You know, news was still going, like looking for signals again.
I think this is a mistake that some of the family offices I've spoken to before have run into, which is the assumption, the assumption that deals will just come to them, right? Most of the VCs I talk to, or, you know, a couple in particular, you know, will say to me, like, if I'm sitting on my ass waiting for deals to come to me, I'm not doing my job.
Yeah.
Like, I've got to be out there hunting for deals. So you have to be picking up the phones. You've got to be looking for those outlines, right? Like, because ultimately, hot deals, everyone's going to cram in. You may not get an allocation. So you've got to find the ones that, you know, that aren't on everyone's radar, right? So I think that's incredibly important. And the second thing that I think often family offices don't realize is, you know, bear in mind a lot of sort of investment offices at a family office, right? Because you know, a true family office is actually run by professionals. It isn't necessarily the principal that is sitting there making all the decisions. Obviously, they're involved, right? But for example, if you've got, you know, someone whose background is in real estate or private equity, you know, where the majority of their balance sheet is going to be invested, it's a really difficult thing to then get into venture, especially early stage venture, where you aren't betting on numbers, you're betting on the individual, or not even the product at that stage.
Yeah, look, actually, as you say out loud, so there were two things that I would say are different. You know, firstly, I had the podcast or have the podcast, Samira Stalks. So I'm a stalker. Like, I will still go out, hunt deals, hunt talent, hunt interesting ideas. And that's, you know, part of the DNA. But actually, I would say my client shared that mindset. So when you talk about a beginner's mindset and you talk about, you know, someone young at heart, he is in the business of music and artistry development. So in a lot of ways, it was the same skill. You know, he found and signed and built Linkin Park.
Yeah,
he was
so you
always
have to find those allies in music.
And so it's actually just the same skill applied in a different way.
Yeah.
So, you know,
but it's reading people it's finding, I would imagine, that star quality. Because star quality doesn't necessarily just come from the fact that you can sing well. There's something above and beyond that, which I guess is very similar within venture, right? Like, it's something beyond, the founder's credentials are great, but there is something more than that you think you can take to the bank.
Kind of, it's the same in both content and venture. I think there are a lot of, and, you know, having been at the BBC, I've seen it there as well with emerging talent, but there are a lot of similarities, which is like the idea, a kind of cultural currency and movement, basically, like, is the market in flow with this? So like Miriam coming in tomorrow on token compression, if you can save people money on their token costs, I mean, you're winning, you know? And then it's the person as well. And it's really the culmination of those three things.
Yeah, I find it fascinating. I mean, having lived in this world for, I mean, certainly in a family kind of orientated world for my entire life, but in a, you know, within the framework of venture for the last decade plus, I just find it absolutely fascinating because, you know, some of the most incredible investors that some of our clients have had on their cap table are the family offices. They because they are the ones that are willing to kind of take the punt, no diligence, right, or very, very very low diligence, like, or informal, but because they are able to make the decision for themselves, it is their money that they're investing.
Yeah.
They can say, actually, you know what? I kind of believe this. I'm going to go ahead. And equally, no, it's not for us, right? Whereas often with VCs, what you get is a kind of halfway house of maybe not now, but maybe later, right? Whereas family offices can just afford to be more direct.
And I think both parties appreciate that.
Yeah.
It's just like
100%.
We don't do a lot of B2B SaaS because he doesn't care.
We don't know what
not
that
because,
means.
Yeah, no, I know what it means. But
and I don't want a spreadsheet.
It's not in the thesis of what an entertainment mogul wants to do.
It doesn't make my heart pump to be investing in a spreadsheet with a nice shiny front end. Yeah, no, look, absolutely. I mean, obviously you will get that in venture as well, where it's sort of outside a thesis. But I think the thing that frustrates a lot of founders is come back when you got a bit more traction, or, you're a little bit early, but, we'd love to follow your journey. And it sounds like if a founder doesn't know how to read between the lines, and a lot of first-time founders don't necessarily know how to do that, it comes off as, we're still interested, keep us posted. Well, actually what the VC is really saying is, it's not for us, but we're not gonna say no, because you never know what is going to happen down the track, whether that founder ultimately builds something else that is within thesis or whatever, right? Whereas I think a family office, they're like, we don't.
Yeah, I always describe it as like, when I was a VC, most of your job is basically saying F off no, but in the nicest way possible, that the door is slightly open.
Yeah.
For the next thing or the pivot or whatever it might be. But to go back to that point, I would say, one thing that is happening now more so than ever is those like goalposts of what is backable are moving so quickly.
Sure.
So Tom Blomfield mentioned a couple of days ago that at YC now, between like build and pitch day, their startups are making 5x more revenue.
Yeah, sure.
So like, it's like the idea that you can launch, unless you're doing like ineffable labs or like deep AI infrastructure where you need, PhD armies of researchers, the idea that you can launch off a deck now with no traction or no prototype or no product.
Well, I think it upends the whole business of venture, actually, because not only can you launch, you can scale.
Exactly.
You don't necessarily need to raise that cash. I think that is going to be one of the stories we're persistently going to see over the next few years, certainly in the pure kind of software SaaS sort of stack.
Yeah, I think software, like I said, is becoming more and more ephemeral. I think the ChatGPT kind of investment, or the tokens that are now going into YC, is another, insane play.
For those that don't know, Sam Altman has essentially said they will invest $2 million worth of tokens into all YC startups on an uncapped safe. So essentially compute for free. Like, it's essentially compute for free, or it's certainly, AI compute well, not for free, it's for equity. So but it tells you where things are going. And I think, I honestly think it's just going to be a really, really interesting environment. We've seen it over the last couple of years. Like, there's just been compression in the number of startups that are getting funded. But I've talked to a lot of, especially deep tech investors over the last couple of weeks, and what they're saying to me is it's getting harder and harder to see which of these is going to have true commercial value in 5, 7, 10 years, whatever it is. So I think what's happening now is because you are able to build lots of stuff very quickly, it means there is a lot of noise.
Yeah.
And therefore, to your earlier point, finding signal within that noise has become harder and harder. Everyone's got a podcast, everyone's got a newsletter, everyone's launching a product, everyone's on LinkedIn. LinkedIn sucks.
That's where like the experience of pattern matching, the experience of relationships, that starts. So it compounds, but you talked about, I think, relationships, and I think it's relationships, it's taste, and it's judgment now that are going to be at a premium. As intelligence trends to zero and essentially becomes a commodity.
Yeah.
Sam Altman in the AI doc also said he's just had a kid, and he said his kid is going to grow up in a world where machines will be more intelligent than them.
Yeah.
So just think about that from a self-identity perspective. Like, we all spend time learning, it gives us agency, it gives us a sense of accomplishment.
Yeah.
Kids will grow up in a world where they're not
having to.
Well, not even having to, that they're not intelligence isn't seen as this like amazing value because
everyone has access to the same level.
Yeah.
But you know, you and I have talked about this. I have a friend who's written a book. It's launching in a couple of months. And it's called Super Skills, Raheem Hirji. Shout out to Raheem, great guy. But that book is about the 7 skills you need in an AI world. And it is not about use N8N or, you know, get Claude Cursor to do this. It is how empathy and critical thinking and those soft skills become inherently more and more important, which is really what we've talked about throughout this whole podcast so far, because I believe you and I are both of that ilk of like human creativity and connection are what drives the world forward, right? When I was growing up, certainly, and I would assume fairly similar for you, intelligence, and I really do air quote that because there are so many different types of intelligence, but certainly book smarts, if I can call it that, was super important. But I also realized that it was completely misguided because the sort of intelligence that going to any school, frankly, in the UK, provides is really the ability to kind of regurgitate facts often, right? Rather than what I would call intelligence today, which is the ability to think through critical thinking, how you think through a topic and how you think about it at a systems level. And I think, you know, that whole kind of question of metacognition, all of this starts becoming super important in a world where, to your point, knowledge is commoditized. Like you don't have to learn when King Henry VIII, you know, you don't have
How many wives?
Yeah, well, you know, divorced, married, died, divorced, married, survived.
There we go.
Divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. So yeah, I kind of remember that. But yeah, like you just don't need that because all that knowledge is at your fingertips. So let's talk about edtech, right? Because at Newsela, you moved the paywall, you shipped curriculum which was used in 90% of US schools and spun up at-home learning products that quadrupled engagement. And this was presumably predominantly during COVID. When does the shift towards bite-sized, personalized formats stop being innovation and start producing kind of Dunning-Kruger style harm? So this goes back to if all knowledge is sort of there, does that mean that actually what we're going to end up with is a bunch of people that know enough to be dangerous, but not enough to actually be relevant? And what are the trade-offs that edtech founders and school leaders have to make when they prioritize engagement over curricular rigor? Because again, as someone that's worked in edtech, has very, very, very strong views about education. I do see us sleepwalking into a problem where, you know, you can see the trends. You know, people are reading far less. They are learning at far less depth. They aren't as curious as others maybe were, or if they are, it's superficial curiosity. But yeah, how do you think about all of these sort of things? Because 10 years ago, when I was in edtech, Raheem and I, you know, we drew up a deck literally about bite-sized, personalized, hyper-personalized learning. We were way too early, but you know, feels like today that's. I mean, you could spin that up in 5 seconds, to be honest.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts?
Again, a lot to unpack, but look, I think the first thing is what's really interesting about the edtech space now is that traditionally we think of that in K-12, and you know, I did spend time building products there, but now it's lifelong learning.
Yeah, sure.
Like to some extent, 50% of white collar workers are now in a live edtech situation constantly with AI tooling coming about, and it's forcing everyone to revisit like their relationship with learning as well. So firstly, what type of learner are you? Do you read? Do you need to make notes? Like, are you a visual learner with Notebook LLM? Or are you just going to chuck in papers and say, explain this to me like a 5-year-old, which I have been doing as well, you know? So we have all these ways to now to first, like I said, self-inquiry. How do you learn best? Fundamentally, I do think education is social. So no matter how much...
Which was why it was such a massive problem during COVID.
Yeah, no matter how much you can be disciplined, you mentioned earlier, you run every single day, you can be disciplined to study every day. You do need a community to discuss ideas, to bounce things around. Sounding boards, actually, it's been shown that like Claude learns better if you give it a sounding board, it will learn faster. So I do think it is inherently social. So you know, Alpha School or AI powered schooling is doing this. It has this notion of, okay, you'll do some deep learning one-on-one with your AI coach, but then there will be group socialization of those ideas, or like a town hall to debate and discuss, or just offer different points of view. So yeah, the first point is that edtech is now lifelong learning. It applies to all adults. You know, with AI coming, there needs to be provision put in place for what people are going to do for work, and what new industries look like. And then the second is figuring out how you learn. And then the third is like, what is the outcome of the learning? So
what is the purpose?
Yeah, in a way, like, you know, to some extent, school teaches us to pass exams. It taught me to game systems, which is great.
Well, it taught me that I was useless at passing exams, however good I was in the classroom, because I loved learning. I hated doing exams. And that's just proven itself to me again and again and again.
And so one thing I found is, you know, like Duolingo may get you to conversational French and Spanish, which is fine. That's the rubric and the outcome of that learning. But sitting down and deciding what that is before you start something is really important. And I'm finding this myself, just playing with tooling. You know, I sit down, I say, okay, I don't know, I launched a faceless YouTube channel. I cloned my voice, started teaching boring maths for AI. But just as a like prototype to say, I want to build a completely agentic workflow just to like learn how to do that with these tools. And that was a really clear objective, and I did it. So we all then now need to start to define, like, there's no curriculum for this. There's no curriculum for being an expert in AI.
Well, because it's impossible at this earlier stage to be an expert in it, because it's changing every 30 minutes.
Yeah. So it's also, I think we all have to decide, like, what does good look like for this task? Like, what does my own curriculum look like? And then what do I want to put together in there, which is really exciting. Yeah,
it is. I think, so where I'm landing on all of this at the moment, my biggest disappointment with kind of edtech in the 2010s was I was super excited, and I was like, but hold on a second, this is literally just digitized content. I'm still looking at someone presenting stuff to me. It's just, yes, I can understand why that's incredibly valuable to an extent, but it actually was still, for me, not engaging, because it isn't the way that I learn, although I haven't really figured out how I learn explicitly myself. I think it is both reading and orally. And then edtech kind of, like, there was a period where edtech just kind of became like, it was a really important kind of vertical for a while, and then it became sort of analogous to kind of can't scale, won't scale, right? Like the outcomes were not there. I think today, where you've got convergence of AI, AR, you really have the opportunity to kind of reimagine how we learn. And I would be super excited to see someone actually do that. I haven't yet come across it, but I do think, like, so it's interesting. I'm going to be interviewing someone who's building a business to fix the user experience with AI, because, you know, we were talking and she was like, you know, the crazy thing is we've gone from, you know, the internet era where it was hyperlinks and you click on that and it was a wall of text, to like really interactive stuff between, you know, whether it's Instagram, TikTok, whatever, but also just on the web. And then AI's come along, and now it's still walls of text, right? It's not visual. There's no clickable things. And therefore, actually improving the UX of AI may actually improve, you know,
the recipient.
Exactly, the usability. And then I started thinking about that. Okay, actually, but because I use it a lot for learning, I could understand how that would make my learning experience much better. I guess my question to you is, having been at Newsela, having you know, been at BBC and no doubt involved in some of the learning products there, where do you think we're going to end up?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say, you know, even at the BBC with CBBC and BBC Bite Size, I don't know if anyone remembers recording at like 2 a.m. with their VHS. Yeah. Look, I think some things will still hold. Like I said, I think education is inherently social. Yeah. I think there's going to be a shift towards lifelong learning. I think there's going to be a mixed media approach, which is this idea of personalized learning with an AI coach, with an AI tutor that learns your style, that learns, like having a personal trainer that learns when to push you, when to soften and build confidence. And then the other side of that approach is some form of social local meetup. So shout out to Local Globe. I've been going to their vibe coding or their open code nights on like Wednesdays, because there is something about just building with other people, being able to ask for help, getting ideas, seeing how people are doing things.
It's the forge of ideas. Again, it's back to that salon concept, right?
Exactly. And there's a beauty in that as well. So I think that is where it is going. We've seen, like I said, we've seen the first vignette of that with Alpha School. But I think one thing that will be held more to account are the outcomes. So do you think we're going to move away from, and this is the thing that I think a lot of people have a problem with, and Scott Galloway talks about this a lot, is the kind of credentialization and kind of corporatization of the education system. The thing is, I think they're always going to be credentials. Like you're getting LinkedIn badges now. Do you know what I mean? Like whatever it is, because people need units of like institutions, proof points in a way. Like
it's institutions,
institutions do hold values, but whether those are standardized tests, like I don't know what they're going to look like, but badges are still going to exist in some shape or form. Yeah, I do. I think that will stay.
I think that's a real. On one hand, I completely agree. At the moment, that feels like it. But again, like when you come back to the point where knowledge acquisition, is now available to everyone, right? Like anyone can learn pretty much anything online if they want to. I just wonder where, so as a I know 25-year-old, does it make sense for me to go and do that Harvard course, or literally just learn it myself, hacking together like a bunch of stuff, right? Like I think that's the thing.
That's why I say, like, sit down with a piece of paper from first principles.
And figure out where you want to get
exactly.
to.
What is the outcome of you learning this? And what are you trying to achieve? And just to add to that point around like badges and credentials, that might look like I shipped something from 0 to 1. Or I grew a podcast to 10,000 or 70,000. Or like I got agents to actually code and put bloody pull requests into GitHub yesterday, which was wild because having been in product for God knows how many years, I have never touched code. And now I can code. And like, this is like just so amazing to me that this is all possible. But no one's going to care about my badge for that. So I think the badges that we start to give ourselves will, start to like in venture at the moment, it's like the badge is I raised X at X, which I think is kind of a stupid badge.
Ridiculous, but it's still a signal.
But a badge of, hey, I got X traction with my first 10 beta clients and, my viral coefficient is bigger than 1. Really meaningful badges. So badges will still exist. They're just going to start to...
change.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think that's super interesting. Although it's had a weird couple of this. So I think my anti-authoritarian, anti-kind of educational streak is like, no, we don't need no badges. With a really bad accent. But I completely understand the point, because I think sadly humans require something to kind of have, right? To show, like you need some way of identifying yourself either within a group or outside of another group, or a differentiation.
Well,
right?
I think I'd love to see badges move towards growth. So like, a kid that didn't have the same level of privilege or access to education, who's overcome those barriers, has been on a far higher growth journey than, others. So I when I hire, I try and look at those types of badges. It would be like the second order thing.
I don't look at which school they go to. I look at, okay, what points to the fact that they are willing to learn, willing to try, fail, do something and go beyond just what a traditional resume says. Like for me, in my book, I write about it as yet to be released. Sorry, apologies. I write about it as, hiring for aptitude over accolades or something along those lines. I probably should revisit that chapter. But essentially what I'm saying in there is, if you present to me, if you are and I remember because I had the same experience, like on paper, 2-2 from university was not at the time qualifying to be an accountant, anything like that. And the HR person at PwC, awful person. Her brother went to Habs. But she basically said, I don't understand why we're giving you this job. Like, look at this guy. He's, he got 2-1 and he's now, studying towards ACCA. But the guy was actually pretty useless in terms of the work, whereas I wasn't. And the problem was, when you just look at it through the lens of credentials, you lose out on potentially really incredible people. I'm not saying I was a really incredible person, but you do have that potential to miss out. So I've tried very hard to look beyond the credential. Like, if you can show to me, areas, whether in your work life or in your social life or as in your home life, where you have really just done something that shows me the caliber of person you are, I'm far more likely to engage than if it's just a case of, well, I got a 2-1 from here and then I worked at the best thing here and I did this here and I learned that there. Because what that tells me is that you can work in a competitive environment, or you can tick the right boxes because often it is a series of box ticking exercises versus actually, I don't really care about the box ticking, but here are the things that I've done that show that I can think through a problem and get to the other side.
Yeah, and like I said at the beginning, I think it really depends on the personality of the person.
Absolutely.
Like, if you're going into a corporate laddered environment, you probably want a lot of people who know how to stay like in their lane and in their structures.
Sure.
And so I think for me, like, I was highly academic. Like, I studied maths at Cambridge. I got straight A stars or whatever it was. But there was a period where I wanted to unlearn some of these like ideologies that we held to a gold standard.
We were told that this is the way it is and don't question it. I think it's probably the right way of putting it. I mean, to give you the example, maths at A level, I've told this story a few times over the last couple of days, funny enough, but I had, I remember we were learning imaginary numbers, and I said to our teacher, who's a lovely guy, shout out to Mr. Barry, I said, yeah, but I want to understand what these are. And he was getting really frustrated. And he goes, Aarish, stop it. You don't need to know. You just need to know that they exist. And that really pissed me off, because I was like, okay, that does, like, from an ADHD curiosity kind of perspective, that does not satisfy me. Just knowing that I need to know this because there's going to be a question in an exam that says, what is an imaginary number, right? Like, that isn't, I need to understand the rationale behind it. And I think that sort of attitude of, you just need to know it to pass the exam is the thing that I rail against all the time. Like, that's the thing that I just can't stand. But
that's actually one difference between the Western and Chinese education system. So the West teach very much against a curriculum and a schematic and like modular, whereas the Chinese teach quite experientially. So the example I give is with vectors. In the UK or in the West, you might learn, okay, there's a number of arguments and then each argument has a position. So if you went with, like whatever it is, 70, 150, that could mean weight and height. And so there's 2 arguments and the position matters. And, in the West, we would learn, okay, so these are the components of a vector, whereas in China, you might learn, okay, you walk into a doctor's office, they give you these 2 numbers. And so
here's the context.
Yeah, exactly. And actually that was one of the things we tried to do with Newsela. That's one of the reasons it was so successful, because we wove curriculum content into news articles.
It's the reason my kids did the IB rather than the UK curriculum. Like, that's how, and China actually loves IB as well. And I spent a lot of time in China when I was in edtech, with the soft skills kind of stuff that we were doing with edtech. That's what schools really wanted. And it's that contextualized, it's the ability to apply different knowledge areas to different parts of life, which is super, super important, right? Like, because that is how life works. Life doesn't work in the same way an exam works. It works in the basis. You've walked into the studio today, the lights are dim. How do you change, what power differential do you need to do to, I don't know anything about lights and power, but what are the things that you need to do to kind of change that environment, or what are the factors that, that you should be applying here? And I think that is actually what I would love to see. The other thing I love about, love them or hate the system. But in China, you have the middle school exams, the Chong, I can't remember what it is, the Chong something, and then the high school exams. But I think I'm correct in saying the Chinese government mandates that only 50% of people that take the middle school exams can graduate to do the high school, and the other 50% have to go into vocational. So they've been really clear that, okay, not everyone needs to be a graduate at this level. Some people will need to work, right?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting you say that, because that's the difference we're seeing right now in the way AI is being rolled out and applied between the West and China. The West are obsessed with AGI, obsessed with getting to this standard as fast, as quickly as possible. China's taken a different approach. They've taken a diffuse model, open source approach, which is let's get AI into every single person's hands, whether you're the waiter, the taxi driver, the person selling stuff on what their version of WhatsApp is. And so
WeChat waiting.
Thank you. And so we're seeing it even there, that they are going for a completely different approach. Like the West respects like the intellectual pursuit in a way, whereas they're a lot more pragmatic when it comes to these
we need
things.
to build a city. Here's a settlement. We're going to build a city. Like they are. I think the difference is, I think about this all the time when I think about Southeast Asia versus the West, but China specifically, right? Like they have the 5-year plan, but they think in much longer timeframes, whereas our political systems mean that you can only think in 4-year increments.
What 18-month increments?
18 months, right? Like so I think we've had 7 leaders over the last 10 years. I mean, it's just absolutely phenomenal. But the point is, they think longer term, and therefore they're able to achieve. And okay, it disrupts things, but it disrupts things from a small period of time. The other thing they did was they blocked the US hyperscalers from their environment. So they've innovated, and I think people who think that China is not innovating are just off their heads, like they are. So they've innovated far more quickly. So if you look at something like WeChat, Weiqing, you can, yes, it's your Facebook equivalent, your Instagram equivalent, but you can also pay for your stuff on there. You can order your cabs through there. You can order your food through there. It's your digital identity. There's like all sorts of things that they've done. And we've got Elon saying, X is going to be the everything app. And yet it still isn't, right? Whereas they just did it and made it happen. They have 30.
Some of that is also not like what I call, non-first mover advantage.
Oh, yeah.
So this idea that
we've seen what worked or what didn't work, and we can do something that works differently or better. And let's also not forget, right? Like the state can wield a pretty heavy axe, right? So no, look, I think overall, how we think about education, how we think about our kids in the world, how they think about what it means to be in a job or a career, like I think all of that is going to come under tremendous flux over the course of the next 5-10 years. It'll settle at some point, but for the time being, I think it's still an open question as to where it'll end up. But I think all of the things we've talked about so far are what will make, the next generation stand out, building relationships, having an open mind, having a growth mindset, being curious, being able to work with different applications at different times, both be generalists, but also know when they can go deep or how they can go deep. I think all of these become super important. I want to move on just before we kind of get to the end of the pod, because we haven't talked about Luxor Beta. So Luxor Beta runs a kind of hub and spoke studio model for high net worths, for family offices and private equity. Whilst you're also looking at kind of sort of product roles yourself, would you keep spending time or spreading time across so many external bets as a studio operator, or are you thinking about committing to kind of one company and giving up that optionality? And what would you be willing to kind of lose?
Yeah, what you're willing to trade. It's a good question. Having gone like deeper at the BBC and at Newsela, you do get your whatever you want to call them, like I don't even know, scarce or whatever.
You've done the corporate thing,
or not even corporate, even a scale up. Sure. So I think it really depends on what it is. If you're working at the frontier of deployed AI at Anthropic or any of these things,
it's a different experience from like a 0 to 1 startup.
Exactly. Sure. So I think you trade breadth, you trade freedom, like financial freedom. I always say free time is a type of freedom, the freedom to work with.
If you are building wealth, what is it for if not to buy time, right? Like, I mean, I think that's the way I always think about it.
Yeah, or experiences or whatever that looks like to you. Yeah. When you have your own company, I have the freedom to work with, to your point, long-term games with long-term people. Basically, I have the people to work with people I want to work with, and quite frankly, not with the people I don't want to. You don't have that luxury in a job.
You can choose, 100%.
Like you've got to find a way to make things work.
You can fire clients if you don't want to work with them.
Or don't take them.
Yeah.
Quite frankly.
Yeah. But often you don't figure out you don't want to work with them until it's a little further in.
But this is the signals point. This is the micro trust point. You know, like you can tell a lot in your first meeting, in your first interaction. Do people follow up? Do they take your time seriously? You know, whatever it is, like those are things that I'm looking at, and I'm sure they're looking at right at the beginning. So I think it just, like everything, you know, it depends on the trade at the time. Like, is the mission something I can believe in? Are these people that I think I can learn from? Is there a trade of value on both exchanges? You know, at one point it was really important. Like I said, tech has no borders. Like, my studio enabled me to like live all over the world. It enabled me to build product, to be an investor, to be a storyteller, to launch a fund from like a beautiful house in Hawaii. Like it's enabled loads of amazing things. And equally, I don't want to say it's for everyone, because equally being at the BBC was probably actually, even on my Uber here, my Uber driver is a photographer for the BBC.
Oh, interesting.
And we had like the most amazing half an hour conversation about how it probably still is the best place I've ever worked.
Yeah.
Like, to work on the longest running radio format Desert Island Disc, to have built Attenborough's like legacy into digital product, to anywhere in the world I was, like there was someone who told me a story about sitting down with their granddad or whoever it was and having that shared experience of like either the news breaking or watching a show. So
it's like it's almost like the access or the depth of access that you can get, right? So I went through this whole phase like everyone should be an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And then I was like, no, actually that's wrong.
And I actually think the ability to be like, I also think there's, again, this narrative of like, you know, I'm unemployable because I'm too feral or whatever it is when you're an entrepreneur. That's not true. We're highly adaptable creatures. And I think we're going to see more of this going forward, that people might take time out to do their own entrepreneurial thing or found something.
Well, we've seen the rise of the fractional, right?
Or even like DeepMind, you know, now they're both the ones at Google, ones at Microsoft. Do you see what I mean? So I think just remaining adaptable to like the conditions at hand, and holding your North Stars and what's important to you, being specific on that.
Yeah, I again, the world we're in is already very different from the world of 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Will be very different from the world of 4 years' time. And I think that, to your point, that adaptability, that openness to whichever path presents itself, being open-minded enough to consider that path and weigh it up, right? Objectively. Like I've long said, you know, I don't think I could go back into into working for someone else. But equally, I've sort of sat there and said, okay, what is the long-term objective for my business? If ultimately I want to sell, for example, my business, and let's say that sale is going to be to a private equity type roll-up or whatever, I'm ultimately going to have to work for someone, right? Like I'm going to have to reconcile myself to the fact that is going to be a part of life, right? So I think what it comes down to, actually, I think what it really comes down to is, if you're working with good people on something that keeps you motivated, it doesn't really matter where you're doing it.
Exactly.
It's the love of it's in the in the doing.
Yeah.
Right.
People underestimate, like the commute, the who you work for, like who you're sitting next to every day.
Yeah.
Like the people you're learning from and working with and liaising with. They underestimate that stuff a lot. You look for whatever it is, the brand, the salary, and those things are important, but don't underestimate the daily stuff that is going to make your life better or worse.
I mean, I know for a fact, right? If I can't run every day, then I can't work. If I can't do this podcast, I can't work. If I've got to commute more than 40 minutes, not going to happen. I have a lot of red lines right now. But no, look, I mean, I've worked in, so at one point, I worked in Potter's Bar, which is up the road, and then we transferred into another business. So then I had to travel to Harlow and back on a daily basis, which is, for those that don't know, near Stansted. So it's like a good hour if you're lucky and there's no traffic. And that just wore me down. But equally, working at a bank wore me down because I was the sort of person that got my stuff, because I was very good at figuring out systems and using systems to make my job easier. So I'd finish work at like 5 or 6. I was back office, right? And the rest of the team were still like grinding away until 7 o'clock. And I'd be like, okay, twiddling my thumbs saying, I want to go home. I had a wife and kid back at home at this point. I want to go home, but I feel like I can't, because that was the kind of culture in that banking environment.
Culture makes a big difference.
It makes a huge difference, right?
Trust.
I would absolutely. And the worst thing I remember in that, and this was maybe a day before I resigned. And I was resigning because I was about to move to Papua New Guinea and they didn't know this. But they frog marched one of my colleagues out of the office, as they do in banks, right? When you're sacked immediately kind of thing. And then they turned around and offered me her position. And then I resigned rather than accept it. And they were very disappointed with me. But just seeing this, and she was pregnant at the time, there was a whole thing. And I was just like, this is not somewhere where I can see myself. It's just not me. It doesn't fit me, my personality, my priorities, my morals. It doesn't work, right? It doesn't matter if it is the best role in the best bank in the world. It won't work for me. But there will be some people for whom that works, and that's absolutely fine.
We're seeing even in the tech companies now, layoffs. ClickUp announced layoffs today. So it's.
Oh, I didn't see that. Okay.
Oh yeah, AI, like standing behind kind of. Citing AI, Jack Dorsey obviously did a similar thing quite recently. So look, all bets are off for everyone, if you know what I mean, which is why, like, invest in your skills, be optimistic, be kind, be good to people, pay it forward, all of those things, because...
Just be a good person.
Yeah, hopefully. It
really helps. Samira, this has been awesome. I want to wrap up with a couple of questions I ask all of my guests. So firstly, what is one thing that you have a contrarian conviction about from any area of life, whether that's work, politics, socially, or at home?
I would say, having worked in tech, scaled tech, been at catalytic moments in tech. I think the shift in the resonance back to analog, like I said, in real life relationships, puzzles, started playing chess with my dad.
Nice.
Like, do a lot of hobbies around tennis, sailing, like a lot of offline analog.
You think we're going to see more and more of that?
Yeah. It's too much. Our brains, the size of our brains, like, can't cope with the level of, they say, like, the level of information that we receive in like a minute or an hour is the same as what a caveman received in their whole life. Like, we are not wired to be behaving like this. Yeah.
Equally, it's just nice to be with people offline, I think, to our earlier point in the conversation. No, I think that's absolutely directionally very much the case. I've had, one of my friends who's been on the podcast, old haberdasher as well. She's been on the pod, but at this time she was a VC, but she then went and worked with Hopin during the kind of pandemic era, etc. And I think, hindsight 2020, all the rest of it, like, it should have been so clear that human beings need human beings, and in real life really matters. It was an incredible platform and piece of technology for what we were all going through at the time. But I don't see a world where humans aren't having conversations like this. I can't, and if we ever get to that point where, in real life no longer matters, then frankly, I submit to the cyborg overlord or whoever it is, because, it's not a world that I really necessarily
But I think it's also one of the reasons the Michael film's done so well, because it probably, like, brings everyone back to an era of, like, when they used to go out and dance, and like every kid learned that dance or tried that dance, and there were these shared moments of experiences. So like music, sport, that all has the ability to do that, to bring together a collective consciousness and a collective experience.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. And finally, so that we can get to know the real you, although I think we've probably gotten to know you pretty well, what is something that moves you the most emotionally?
Not access to education, but access to knowledge.
Yeah,
universal access to that type of empowerment. I think it's guided a lot of decisions I've made. Whilst living in LA, I worked on the board of directors for the Griffith Observatory Foundation.
Oh, wow.
And part of their program was to get every year 5 class in California is entitled to a yellow school bus up to the observatory. And they closed down the observatory one day a week to let all schools in California can apply for this. And when you see like a kid's face when they like look into a telescope, or a sense of awe around the cosmos, or whatever it is, that delight, that curiosity, I think is amazing. And yeah, I would say even at the BBC, like it's inform, educate and entertain, you know, to be able to unlock that for people is something that really drives me. And it was a driving factor behind the podcast as well, like the interview series around like sharing knowledge, sharing stories. It's essentially sharing a possibility. I always think of it as a kaleidoscope. You can chink something slightly and like a whole new world or a whole new paradigm or altitude can be opened up for someone. So that is something that moves me.
I think that's absolutely beautiful. Definitely something that resonates, and let's hope that we can, you know, get every child across the globe educated to similar standards, and you know, let's see what happens from there. Because, you know, today we still have large swathes of the population, you know, not being educated to certain levels. Imagine what gets unlocked if they all are. I mean, like I don't think we can even comprehend where we will go if and when that happens. But Samira, this has been an absolutely incredible conversation. Thank you so much for joining me. For our listeners, where can they find you online? Are you on LinkedIn? Are you on X or elsewhere? Where's the best place for them to find you on the internet?
Good point, actually. Probably LinkedIn is best right now. Also my company website, luxorbeta.com. But I'm quite responsive on LinkedIn at the moment.
Okay, well, amazing. We will put the links in the show notes. For the time being, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.